Stephen Colbert didn't think the night would go like this. He had booked Denzel Washington to talk about his new film on community justice, and he had booked Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett to break down her latest push against the administration's foreign policy. Two big guests, two easy headlines. What he hadn't counted on was that neither one of them would play his game. The moment the lights went up, the audience roared, the kind of applause Colbert's producers knew would carry the whole first segment. Denzel Washington stepped out first, calm as ever in a dark suit, that quiet gravity that made everyone hush the second he nodded at the crowd. Denzel said, "Good to be here, Stephen." Jasmine Crockett walked out next, all fire and poise, her handshake firm, her eyes scanning the crowd like she was counting who came for a joke and who came for the truth. Jasmine said, "Thanks for having us." Stephen leaned back in his chair, cue cards fanned like a magician's deck. Stephen said, "We've got two people here who know how to shake up a room, one on the big screen, the other on the house floor. Let's get right into it." He flipped the first card, his grin practiced. Stephen said, "Denzel, you said last week you'd never apologize for calling out moral cowardice in leadership, even when it costs you work. What does that mean in plain English?" Denzel's voice was low, each word smooth but heavy. Denzel said, "It means you don't hide behind comfort when the stakes are real. You say what needs to be said. You take the hit." The audience clapped, a few hooped. Colbert leaned into it, pushing for a laugh. Stephen said, "So you're saying our leaders are cowards?" Denzel looked at him, unblinking. Denzel said, "Some are cowards. Some are just pretending they don't see the cost." Jasmine nodded beside him, eyes never leaving Stephen's face. Jasmine said, "And some folks on these shiny stages make a living pretending that cost is just part of the show." A few gasps. The audience wasn't sure if they were supposed to clap or shift in their seats. Stephen forced a grin. Stephen said, "Okay, so now it's my fault too?" Jasmine didn't flinch. Jasmine said, "You make fear funny. That's how you keep people from feeling how bad it is." Stephen tried to laugh it off. Stephen said, "Well, laughter is good for the soul, right?" Denzel's stare was calm, his tone like gravel under steel. Denzel said, "Not when it hides the truth you don't want to look at." Stephen shuffled his cards, his fingers twitching just once. He said, "All right, Jasmine, you said in an interview last week that America's biggest threat isn't Iran or Russia, it's us. Care to explain that one?" Jasmine leaned forward, voice smooth but sharp. Jasmine said, "It's simple. We're the threat when we get comfortable being lied to. When we let people like you turn a crisis into a punchline because the punchline pays better." A hush moved through the studio. Half the front row leaned back like they were watching something they weren't supposed to see. Stephen forced a grin again. Stephen said, "So you two really came here to blame the messenger? That's the plan." Denzel didn't blink. Denzel said, "You're not the messenger, Stephen. You're the distraction." The audience half gasped, half applauded. Stephen laughed, too loud, too empty. Stephen said, "Wow. All right, maybe I'll just let you two run the show tonight." Jasmine didn't move, didn't smile. Jasmine said, "Maybe you should." And the burn was only getting started. Stephen Colbert shuffled his cue cards again, the grin on his face stretched tight enough for everyone to see the panic slip through. He leaned in like he was about to win the moment back with a clever jab. Stephen said, "So let me get this straight. Denzel Washington, two-time Oscar winner. Jasmine Crockett, Congresswoman. You're both sitting here telling me that late-night comedy is what's killing America." Jasmine didn't blink. Jasmine said, "I'm saying your jokes make fear feel normal. You get people to laugh instead of feel it." The audience made a low hum, the kind that told Stephen the giggles weren't coming easy anymore. Stephen forced a chuckle, trying to pivot. Stephen said, "Denzel, come on, you've been in this town longer than any of us. You know how this works. You want me to be serious every night?" No laughs. Just doom and gloom. Denzel's tone stayed steady. That weight in his voice no sarcasm could bend. Denzel said, I want you to remember your job isn't to keep people comfortable. It's to remind them when it's time to stand up. A few people clapped, quick, sharp. It made the pause after land heavier. Stephen tapped his cards on the desk, eyes darting to the producer just off camera. He tried to spin it back. Stephen said, "Look, nobody here wants more war. Nobody here wants fear. But you two know better than anyone. Sometimes you have to stand behind a leader who's willing to pull the trigger." Jasmine's eyebrows lifted, her stare slicing the grin right off his face. Jasmine said, "And you stand behind them when they're right, not when they're reckless." Denzel nodded, gaze locked on Stephen like he'd pinned him in place. Denzel said, "You know what cowardice looks like, Stephen? It looks like pretending every president is the same. It looks like acting shocked when they do what they said they would." Stephen's laugh cracked a little too high. Stephen said, "So I'm a coward now, huh? Because I make people laugh about real life." Jasmine's voice dropped, soft but sharp enough to draw blood. Jasmine said, "You're not a coward for laughing, Stephen. You're a coward for knowing better and laughing anyway." A hush fell. No applause this time. No forced giggles from the corner rows. Stephen squirmed, but the grin wouldn't come back. He looked down at his cards, fingers drumming too fast. He said, "Well, okay, so what do you want me to do? Read policy briefs on air? Bring the Pentagon out here and let them cry on my couch?" Denzel leaned in, just enough to make Stephen freeze. Denzel said, "I want you to tell people the truth. The truth is the fear you joke about kills real people. The truth is you don't get to be the good guy if you hide the cost behind a monologue." Someone near the front clapped, a single clap that died when the room didn't follow. The tension made it feel bigger than any roar. Stephen shifted in his seat, eyes darting between Denzel and Jasmine. He said, "So you're blaming the messenger?" Jasmine shook her head once, slow and certain. Jasmine said, "No, we're blaming the enabler." And for a heartbeat, the studio felt like it might crack wide open. Stephen Colbert cleared his throat, tapping the stack of cue cards like maybe the next one would be the line that saved him. The audience sat in a hush that felt bigger than the lights. No forced giggles, just that pulse in the room when you know you're watching someone lose control of their own stage. Stephen tried for his smile, the easy one that always worked. Stephen said, "All right, so I'm the problem. Late-night TV is the problem. If I'm so bad, why'd you both come on my show?" Jasmine didn't flinch, didn't even shift in her chair. Jasmine said, "We came because people listen to you. They trust you. They don't know they're being rocked back to sleep." Denzel's voice slipped in before the laughter could find its legs. Denzel said, "You're the problem because you know better. You're the problem because you trade courage for comfort and pretend that's the same thing." Stephen gave a nervous chuckle, gesturing to the crowd like he could pull them to his side. Stephen said, "You two sound like you'd cancel every joke if you could." Jasmine's smile was small, almost kind, but it cut sharper than a shout. Jasmine said, "Not every joke, just the ones that sell fear as entertainment." Stephen pushed back in his chair, arms folded like armor. He said, "So what do you want, huh? A world where no one laughs? Where we all just cry every night?" Denzel didn't blink. Denzel said, "I want a world where when you laugh, it's because you faced the truth, not because you buried it." A ripple moved through the audience. Claps, soft at first, then growing when people realized they'd just watched a line they'd remember. Stephen's grin cracked again, voice brittle. Stephen said, "So that's it? You're just gonna call me weak, call me a coward, say I'm the problem?" Jasmine leaned in, elbows on the desk, her stare locked on his eyes like she was done pretending this was all just a show. Jasmine said, "We're not saying it, Stephen. You feel it. That's why you're sweating under these lights." Stephen tried to laugh. It came out as a choked half cough. He shuffled the cards, but they dropped from his hands and scattered on the desk. Denzel's voice landed the final blow, calm, heavy, the kind that made the back row lean in even though they already knew what was coming. Denzel said. You're the problem, and you know it. Stephen opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The audience didn't laugh. They didn't whoop. They just watched, a few nodding like they'd waited too long to hear someone say it plain. Jasmine stood first, giving the crowd one slow nod. Jasmine said, "If you're tired of watching the truth turned into a joke, stand up. Say something. Be something better than this." Denzel rose next, his eyes never leaving Stephen's face. Denzel said, "Comfort is the lie that keeps you here. The truth is what'll make you walk out." And with that, they stepped off the stage together. No wave, no cheap mic drop, just a silence that made every light in that studio feel like it was pointed at the man left sitting there. This is the USA Liberty. Subscribe if you know the truth should make you uncomfortable. Subscribe if you're tired of laughing at the same fear that's breaking your neighbors. Subscribe because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stand up and leave the lie behind. They're not the problem forever, if you stop giving them the comfort they crave.